I'm Travis Kenny with Smith & Wesson, and in this GUNSMARTS video, we partnered with the USCCA to talk about traveling with firearms. The U.S. Concealed Carry Association is the industry leader, providing resources to educate and empower responsible Americans. I'll now pass off to our friends Beth and Richard.
Thanks, Travis. So now we're going to be talking about traveling with a firearm. We're going to be talking from the context of traveling outside of your everyday carry. So this is when you're taking a gun from point A to point B, and it's not for defensive purposes. This would be going to the range. This would be traveling out to another state, something like that. And there's a lot of things we want to keep in mind to make sure that that firearm is safe and secure at all times.
Yeah, and one thing that's really important, Richard, is that we want to recommend that everyone is going to travel with that firearm unloaded. This is not your everyday carry gun. This is a gun that's going wherever you want to take it for whatever purposes. So make sure that gun is unloaded before you pack it up. And one way to make sure that you've got a nice visual reference that that gun is empty and clear, of course, we also want to make sure magazines are empty and clear. But with the firearm itself, you can use a chamber flag of some sort, which is a really fantastic, easy to use little indicator right there that that gun is unloaded. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to trust it. That doesn't mean we're not going to check again, but it's really great to have that visual reference so you can just spot really quickly that you have done your job. Another thing that you can use, also easy, the cable lock. This gun lock is easy to use. It just slips down through that magazine well. You can have it with you if you need it. It's just an extra little thing for safety in case you ever want to use that as well.
Yeah, and what I like about the cable locks is that extra level of control.
Yep.
A chamber flag, you can easily pull that out, and now you have a gun that you can actually load. But with a cable lock, it's locked, and unless they have the key, they can't do that.
And speaking of locks,
Yep.
we also have these really heavy duty ones you might have noticed. You can actually have that, of course, on the case itself. And it's really great on the hard cases, obviously, whether you're carrying around your long guns, whether you're carrying around your handguns or pistols. And these will come in later. This will be very important when we start to talk about how to fly with your guns. And that's a whole nother topic we'll be addressing soon.
Now, I noticed you've got that nice hard case there, but there are also soft cases as well, like this rifle case. Biggest difference there, a hard case has that nice rigid plastic frame, perfect for traveling, especially when you're flying somewhere. But this is great also for a quick trip to the range, something like that. It's usually a lot lighter weights, got a little flex to it. It's a great alternative for that. I don't recommend flying with these because it's just not a very secure way to do so. We also want to talk about range bags. So anytime you're traveling to the range, you want to make sure that you have your range bag as well. So yep, firearm cases are good, but you also want to make sure you have something to carry all your other gear.
Yes.
So that could be your extra ammo. It could be your eyes and ears, a cleaning kit. If you're spending maybe just an hour or so at the range, maybe you don't need that cleaning kit. But if you're going to be spending like a day at the range or 3 days at one of those super awesome, firearms classes, you're going to want to clean that gun at some point. So it's always good to have an extra range bag where you keep all those extra components.
And Richard, what's really awesome about the soft cases for your handguns or those gun rugs, you basically can, with the gun inserted, just slip it right in there, and it's super easy. And for extra tips, Julie Golub did a fantastic video with GUNSMARTS that teaches you about all the tips and tactics for getting this packed just right. The most important thing to understand about traveling with firearms is reciprocity. Now, if you haven't heard that term before, what we mean by this is it might be a different state or even country or somewhere where you're not currently living or where your permit was actually given to you. They might or might not recognize your permit's privileges. So it's imperative that you understand that before you travel.
Absolutely. And you know what? The USCCA is an industry expert in reciprocity with a wealth of resources on their website. So before you plan your next trip with your firearm, be sure to check out the Reciprocity Map or check out this video below. Okay, so we've talked about reciprocity. We've talked about general travel with a firearm. Let's dive a little bit more into what that actually looks like. So now in our context, we're not talking about that quick trip to the range. We're talking about that more extended trip. Maybe you're traveling out of state for a couple of days. How does that change how you travel with your firearms?
Luckily, there are some things we've already spoken of that are still going to translate into that maybe overnight trip to grandma's or you're visiting a friend. We already talked about this case, which is great for that handgun. It's easy to secure with these great locks. But here's another option that's really great that I happen to really like. With a little code, you can pop open that firearm and you can easily store the gun. You see, we still have that chamber flag right there and whatever else you need. And then it's awesome because it locks up. You don't need anything extra except for hopefully your brain so you remember the code to get into it later on. And then pop that in your suitcase. It's super safe and secure. Nobody would even know it's there. Again, though, be sure that your firearms, whenever you're transporting them, are unloaded and clear. So that's super important before you get on that road trip.
Right. So that's handguns. And if you're traveling with a rifle, so before we had that nice soft case for that quick trip to the range, but when you're going on an extended trip, we definitely recommend getting a hard case like this one here. And again, you'll notice it's got those areas where you can put a nice sturdy padlock on as well, keep it nice and secure. And this rifle case in particular has several on here to keep it nice and locked up tight. So opening that up, you'll notice again, we have the rifle is unloaded.
Yep.
Okay, we have our chamber flag in there, unloaded magazines as well. Again, when you're traveling, this isn't your defensive firearm.
Right.
We're storing it for travel. So you shouldn't need to access this for that emergency.
Yeah, and with travel, you also have to be cautious. We want to make sure that we're not just going to haphazardly throw a case into our car and then someone is able to easily spot that, because I would probably recognize that there's probably a gun in there. So you want to be discreet and cautious about those kinds of things.
Right, because either it's going to be some expensive camera equipment or it's going to be a firearm. Either one of those is going to draw some attention to you. So you really need to have your situational awareness turned on so you know who's paying attention to me and my inconspicuous case.
That's right. Well, and with that, what if you can't take your own vehicle? Maybe you're not going to do the driving and you're going to let public transportation take you somewhere. It's very important that you know by researching maybe their website whether or not you're even allowed to take those firearms with you or what those stipulations might look like. So be very cautious whether it's a bus or a train or even rideshare. Make sure that you understand what the regulations might be for that.
It's that know before you go,
Know
right?
before you go.
Yeah.
That way you're not getting in trouble when you're going off to see grandma.
Yes, so do your quick research. Even if you traveled several times, you never know when things change. So always, make sure you're checking up on local laws, things like that. Again, USCCA Reciprocity Map is a great resource for all those for you.
So now we want to talk specifically about flying with firearms. And this can be a very specific process, and it's going to take a little time and maybe some research so that you can do this properly. One thing to consider is that right out of the gate, traveling with a handgun is very different from traveling with a long gun. So a handgun makes it maybe a little easier because you can get that nice hard case and put it in your checked bag, or you can have a separate case, or like Richard had earlier when he was traveling with his long gun, we had a nice hard case all on its own where that can safely and securely be transported to wherever you're going.
Absolutely. And there's a couple things you want to keep in mind too. We talk about, know before you go. So again, reciprocity matters. So make sure you have reciprocity in the state that you are flying to, with your firearm. Now, long guns have a little more leeway when you're traveling around the country, but handguns, that's where things can get really, really in the weeds. So make sure you check that reciprocity map from USCCA and to make sure you can safely travel to that state. So with that in mind, when you're going to the airport, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. So not only does TSA have some regulations, but your airport that you're traveling out of and traveling to might have some regulations, and the airline you're flying on might have additional things that they want you to do. So when you get to the airport, a really easy way to do that when you're traveling with a firearm in its own case is just walk up to the counter and declare that you have an unloaded firearm that you'd like to check. So when you have this hard-sided case like this, a couple things you want to keep in mind is you've got locks for it as well. So this here has two places here for a lock, and typically they're going to want you to have a lock for each hole. So if you're traveling with a long gun, if it's got 4 places where you can put a padlock, you need to bring 4 locks, right? To keep that all locked up. So make sure you have enough locks for that case. When you open it up, you're going to show them that it is an unloaded firearm. Now, I recommend you have something like a chamber flag or a cable lock in there in the firearm to show them that it is unloaded. Okay, so they'll see that. Make sure the magazines are separate from the firearm. You've got the ammunition in there too. So again, traveling with ammunition, same regulations as flying with a firearm too. You want to keep it in a cardboard, wood, plastic case something like this, it'll separate it. Don't just throw it in a plastic baggie and think you're good. Make sure it's in its own separate container. It can stay in the same case as the firearm if you're traveling with it. So when you get to that counter, they look at it, they see that it's unloaded, they're going to give you one of these slips that says, yep, firearm's unloaded. They're going to put that right in the case. You're going to close it up, lock it up, and then they're going to take it away. They'll put a little slip on there. See, your case has one on there. So why don't we just start talking about your travel kit here?
Yeah, and with all these extras in mind, it's really important that you build in some extra time to your travel. Obviously, Richard already told us that when you get there, you're going to have to go through the process of declaration and filling out forms, whatever that airline or that airport requires. So definitely build in extra time so that you're not just, oh my gosh, scrambling to get to where you need to go.
Yeah, it's stressful enough to be traveling
Absolutely.
without a firearm, at that busy time of the day. So just imagine having to add an extra hour or
Exactly.
two to that process.
And you might need a little extra time when you get to your arrival destination as well, because they will put a special tag on your checked luggage that means that you need to go to that airline's office to pick up your firearm or your case or whatever it might be. Typically, they're looking for, you've got your ticket or you've got that stub, or sometimes even showing your ID, just to make sure that you are the owner of that bag and you are free to safely take that with you.
All right, so we talked a lot about the processes and procedures you need to follow when you're traveling, and we know that the TSA has their own procedures. The airport you're flying out of is going to have their own procedures. The airline you fly on is going to have their own procedures, and they could all be different. And it's on us as the responsible firearm owner to know what those differences are. But it's not just enough to know what those are yourself. You might be encountering that person behind the counter who maybe it's their first day on the job. Maybe they're not as up to speed as you are on those processes and procedures, and that can lead to some interesting situations, right?
I think that most of us who travel with firearms, even if it's only been a couple of times, there are sometimes some uncertainties, and there's definitely differences from one trip to the next. So one thing that's really important is to basically expect the unexpected, because you never know what little nuanced thing they might ask you to do that might be different, and ultimately just be very calm, polite, professional as you listen to their requests and hopefully comply and cooperate. Honestly, you might know a lot more about these different things than they do. Just be there in case they ask any questions. And again, that's why we build in that extra time, just in case it takes them extra time to go through their procedures the correct way.
Yeah, because that's going to be your fallback. As long as you're knowledgeable about what the current policies and procedures are, you're really doing everything you can to keep yourself out of trouble.
Just like we mentioned, TSA.gov, USCCA Reciprocity Map, know before you go.